Hi everyone, this is Raymond Wood at the Raymond Wood podcast. We've got Rob Kolak with us today. How are you, Rob?
I'm fantastic. And yourself?
Very well, thank you. Now, for my listeners and viewers, last on we had Q Jallians and I was super excited about that one. I'm even more excited about this one because I keep getting thrown at me. When are you going to have a goalkeeper on? When are you going to have someone who's played in goal? Do you do anything with goalkeepers on your programmes? So I think everyone's going to like this, not just only from the goalkeeping side, but also from outfield as well. And we're gonna get straight into it with Rob. So Rob, I actually met you probably just under 12 months ago at one of our entrepreneurial groups, which is called The Iconic, with Ethan Zanarty and Sheree Arliston. And it's amazed me how many footballing people I've met in these rooms. I thought I was going to be the only one. So we're going to get straight into it. And obviously your football life, where did you start football and why did you start football?
All right, so a little bit about my background. So growing up as an Australian-born ethnic background, my background's Croatian. Football for us is obviously like a religion. So for me, inherently, it was in the family from the early days. My father was very into football, but more on the sort of knowledge base. He never really played anywhere significantly. It was more my brother, and then obviously I was following in his footsteps. But ironically enough, in my early days, I was an on-field player, and I was actually pretty good. I grew up in a South American-dominated neighbourhood, you could say, and so I had that sort of upbringing rather than the traditional Aussie-Croatian sort of background. I followed the South American footpath, and a testament to my earlier days and the skill set that gave me later on. Growing up around Brazilians, Uruguayans and Argentinians was sort of, it was very, very beneficial to me at that point in time and later paid a lot of dividends.
So for our listeners, where was it you grew up in Australia?
So I grew up in Western Sydney in Fairfield, and famously enough, Harry Kewell also grew up within the same neighbourhood, and well, obviously we followed a lot of those current Socceroos progress, and football in that era was massive.
Yeah.
So growing up in Western Sydney, it was a very footballing sort of dominated culture. You obviously had the Croats versus the Italians, and it was very ethnic back in those days. So that was interesting. And growing up, obviously, having had my background and in combination with all my friends loving football and playing football, for us, we were just football mad, in those days.
I've never experienced Western Sydney until this year for the first time, and we done our objective testing down there. And I think we had 65 players registered when we got there. I think there was 150 players there. They were coming from everywhere.
Yeah.
And it was amazed me, the passion. It was like being back home in Europe. It was like being in Liverpool.
Yeah.
There was kids coming from everywhere. We haven't signed up, but can we join in? So we took every single player on from that trial, and we've unearthed, I think, probably. We're very excited about one boy and one girl in particular who we've unearthed down in Western Sydney. So it seems like a very, very good breeding ground down there, and they seem to be doing the right things. So talking about your football growing up in Western Sydney, did you always play in goal, outfield? How did you start, and how did you end up finishing up where you did?
Sure. So for many years I was a central midfielder. I was fortunate that I had my growth spurt earlier on. So physically, I was a very dominant centre mid who had that sort of vision. And growing up with obviously South Americans, like I just mentioned, it was a good combination because that was the one area that they lacked, and I sort of filled that void for my team back then. Growing up playing central midfield was my passion. Controlling that centre of the midfield was everything that I loved to do, receiving the ball and, being that creative aspect. And it wasn't only until a semi-final under 12s, I believe it was, under 11s or 12s, where we got to the semis, and unfortunately our goalkeeper got injured. So my coach, funnily enough, picked the biggest and tallest kid, which is myself, and I did exceptionally well. I saved, I think it was 2 or 3 penalties, and I was the hero of the moment. It got us into the grand finals against the great Marconi Stallions, and that was such an achievement for us, a nobody club. No one had ever heard of us. We were the biggest underdogs, and we were in the top division in Sydney.
Amazing. So from there, you were the goalkeeper.
From then on in, it was okay. No experience. My father obviously had a good, extensive knowledge of the game, and he knew his history very well, and he knew that if I was going to be a goalkeeper, the only legendary goalkeeper coach that he advised me to go and see was the great Ron Corey, who obviously produced or had a good contribution to producing Bozza and Jelko Kulak. So
that's amazing. So he works with players like Mark Bosnich.
Yeah. So
fantastic. So in where we are at the moment, the current setup, so we've got SAP and NPL football. Obviously, when me and you were playing, and also you, it was obviously wasn't NPL. What was the division or the league you were playing in?
So that was the state league, which is the NPL now.
Yeah.
Back then, obviously, NPL being the highest, City United was my local club, and everyone knew that as long as you were at those top clubs like your Olympics, your Marconi Stallions, and your City Uniteds, obviously there are the other big clubs too, but they were the ones that I knew that you had to be at to really be considered for any of the next stages.
Yeah. And then just for like our listeners, how far did you go with your football career? So when you got into like senior football, what was the highest that you played?
Sure. So I will just briefly mention before I transitioned, I was fortunate enough to be picked by complete chance. At 14 years old by the first team Croatian national team coach and the goalkeeper coach, which did a camp just to sort of raise awareness at City United.
Yeah.
And that's what initially put me on the radar. They did a bit of a sort of a guest appearance at City United.
So they come across from Croatia to run this event?
Yeah, so they were known to be doing this with the objective of obviously poaching those early on players, I can assume.
Yeah.
But unofficially, they would come and do like a bit of a, sort of a fundraising event. And initially, I didn't even have money to do that event, and then my auntie was just like, what are you doing in the stands? Go and run home and get your gloves and come back. So I was like sprinting home, come back, and after 20 minutes, I had a bit of a sort of objective testing, you could say, with the first team Croatian team coach, which I was in complete awe of. Within 20 minutes, is just like, mate, who on earth trains you?
Wow.
You need to come and showcase this in Croatia, and that was my first sort of branch into being recognised by complete sheer accident.
So again, right place, right time.
It was right place, right time. Thanks to my auntie who sponsored the event. At that point in time, my family was obviously, we weren't well enough. So for me to get into those top tier programs and to be obviously considered, you have to have a bit of money, it is, much like it is now.
Yeah, it is hard. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do with our objective testing and pro player pathway. Those first entry points into our program, it's free.
Yep.
Because we don't want to scare players away or families away, because there's always a cost associated in Australia.
Yep.
I think, unfortunately, the people and the powers that be don't look outside the box to actually see how they can fund football.
Yep.
And I think there's lots of great examples in Australia, like AFL. Yep. I mean, the cost of doing AFL in this country is phenomenal. It's like $200-300 and you can play AFL. It gives you a kit and a ball and everything. So if they can do it, we're in a world game. Why can't we do it? And it's,
for sure,
it's really frustrating.
For sure.
Without getting caught up with the frustrations of football in Australia, but to then move on, did you then get an opportunity to go to Croatia? And did you take
so
it?
the following week, they all expenses paid for trip. They took me over to the national team where I met the likes of some of my heroes who I was used to watching on TV. And so again, this is a transition from City United playing under 13s, 14s, and straight to Croatian national youth team setup. 2 years above, mind you. So they were like, we want to see at 13 how you compare up against the under 15s.
But wait, in Australia, that's not allowed.
Well,
you can't play up ages because that doesn't develop players.
Yeah. So as you and I have spoke about this many times, this is the biggest flaw, or one of my personal opinions, that where we sort of lack. We should be incentivizing young athletes to sort of play above their age, especially with the talent that they already have.
Yeah.
If they're dominating their age, they should be, should be playing above.
And that's the big thing that we've addressed, that we try and challenge the federation and clubs, and you've got to allow it.
Yep.
Because I even think back to my time at Leicester City, and players like Luke Thomas and Harvey Barnes, they were in the top 5 percentile of their group.
Yep.
So they actually become like what we call the coach within the session. Yep. Everyone's learning from them, but they're not learning off anyone else.
Yeah.
So hence then they go up an age group or two. And I think Harvey was playing 2 or 3 age groups up when he was 13 with us at Leicester. And it's scary to think if he wasn't allowed to have that opportunity to develop himself as a player and his game, he wouldn't have developed that maturity as well off the pitch. And you look at him now, and he's now playing for Newcastle United. He's played against PSG this morning in the Champions League. And it's like, I just don't know when the Federation and Clubland are not going to get it. Yet we know we get a lot of parents who say, oh, my Johnny or little Sarah's brilliant, they should play up an age. We know we get a lot of them parents. But we've got to be identifying talent early. And the big things is, again, and you're aware of it, like we do our objective testing. It identifies talent early, and and it also teaches us how to develop talent and how to spot weaknesses. We just don't have it. So rolling back then, what did that feel like when you've been chosen on an all expenses paid trip to go to Croatia?
Mate, that was just a dream come true. I'll never forget the first moment when I seen Davor Šuker come down and Zvonimir Boban come down. So I'm sitting there at the cafe that they have in Zagreb. You know, the week before I had no intentions, so I was just playing my club football, and now all of a sudden I'm being greeted by my heroes, you know. So
amazing.
And the way that I got treated was with such open arms and with love and support. And that sort of gave me that drive and motivation to say, okay, I'm obviously here for a reason, because those doubting belief systems start to sink in. It's like, gosh, they must have made a mistake. You know, I think it's only 20 minutes of training and now I'm here.
How old was you when you were in Croatia?
I was only 13. Wow. So I was a year and a half younger than the current group that was there. So obviously for me, that was daunting back then. But, you know, that gave me the confidence knowing that the first team, national team players were coming down and just saying, look, just being cool, calm and collected and just down to earth and just say, look, you just do you. You're obviously here for a reason. And, you know, you'll do great. Just believe in yourself.
Was you nervous?
I was shitting myself. You know, I was absolutely in awe of them. But at the same time, I was so nervous and petrified. I was like, you know, being in a national team setup at that young was also foreign. You know, it wasn't until many years later, which obviously follows onto my story of how I started getting recognised in Australia.
Yeah.
So obviously with the articles and stuff that got put out then, that sort of put me in Australia's radar, which is what led me on to being accepted through the Institute of Sport.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's funny, like we've just taken players back to the UK and we've managed to get 3 of our players into contracts with pro clubs, and we're going to reveal the exciting news in June, July next year. But I sort of take for granted being in the pro game and working in the Premier League. I'm working in France for PSG. I've just taken that for normal. And then I've taken this 12-year-old into Liverpool and I've looked at this player and this player is just white. And I'm like, you'll be fine. Just go and do your football, but not actually really recognising the fact that this player is being plucked from Australia, 12 years of age, has been taken into Liverpool, arguably one of the biggest clubs in Europe. And I'm just expecting it to be normal for them. So it was a realisation for me that I need to probably prepare them on that side a little bit better.
Yeah, the psychological aspect, and again, we'll touch a bit on this. But so obviously transitioning from where I was at that point in time into the State Institute of Sport, then obviously part of that scholarship program, which was really good, and I'm a big advocate of it. That was your first bit of preparation for if wanting to get into the young national teams for Australia, provided you're good enough. So obviously transitioning from the New South Wales Institute of Sport, I was there for 2 years on the program, which is all scholarship based. So you went to school and you did your football. For the most part, it was full time, so 5 to 6 nights a week.
Did mum or dad have to pay anything for that, or was
that was free? But that was part of the scholarship.
Yeah.
So you got proper testing. Again, we had state of the art facilities at Homebush Olympic Park, which all the other top athletes of the state had access to. So that program was the branch into going into the next step, which was the Australian Institute of Sport, which was the best roundup from all the institutes statewide. Got accepted into Canberra, which is no longer running, and it, you know, baffles me as to why that's not running.
Well, I was going to ask your belief and opinion on that. Do you think it should be running, and why isn't it running?
Okay, so again, this is only my personal opinion, but for me, the Australian Institute of Sport football program was our best pathway into transitioning overseas.
Yeah.
Having had produced a lot of the internationals, also the ex-professional footballers into Europe. That was good because you would be able to transition from mum and dad driving you to training to now you're living away. So in a football club-like mentality, you're away from it all. You're sort of isolated. And now your sole focus is football.
Yeah.
So part of that program obviously had, again, state-of-the-art facilities. You had some of the best coaches that Australia had to offer us. At that time, we had a Dutch coach supplemented by some of the ex-Australian Socceroos. Which was great because we would live together, train together, eat together. Again, very similar to a professional football setup.
So what year was you there at that setup?
It was 2007, plus or minus. And from my understanding, the year after or the 2 years after that I left, they canned the program, which is a shame because their emphasis then went on to the A-League setups, which again...
Yeah. It's so funny you said that, and I knew what you were going to say because we done a study, and there's 54 players from Australia who've played in the Premier League, in the top division of England, in its whole entirety in its history. Up until 2008, there was 44.
Wow.
And since 2009, there's only been 10. So the evidence is there, and I just don't know when the federation are actually going to look at it and actually go, do you know what? The wheel wasn't broken.
Yeah.
Why did we try and fix the wheel that wasn't broken? For me, the best thing they could do is reverse that and go back to that setup.
Yep.
And I think even now, with the finances available in the sport and the game and the size of Australia, we could have an AIS setup in every state.
Yeah.
And why not? I mean, you know, we had this conversation. You know, we've got a guy in Q Jallians who lives in Australia, who's played the World Cup, kept a clean sheet against Lionel Messi. He's played Champions League football. He's one of probably about 8 people, including yourself, who I've met in the past 15 years of time of being in Australia. And none of us work or are involved with the federation. And it's like, why not? We're here. I've offered my time, and I've said it openly on this podcast. I'll give my time for free. I wouldn't want to be paid. I would help Football Federation Australia design a map to produce and develop football superstars, both in the women's and in the men's game. But they're going along like everything's fine and rosy, and it's not. We're not producing talent. And all the good talent we've got are going to Europe when they're 12, 13 and 14. I mean, if you look at that Matildas group, the majority of them are 14 and 15 went across to England. Yep. The reason why they're so successful because they're in that setup over there. Yep. But we should be able to keep them here longer and produce them here longer. Do you agree?
Oh, for sure, definitely. And the emphasis back in my day, in the earlier days, was to go through those, to go through that preparation, to go through the institutes of sport, the scholarships, the free programs, and then obviously the AIS was the objective. And that would prepare you for that transition overseas. But the emphasis was let's stay here as long as we possibly can and then obviously get selected for the national teams before we transitioned.
Yeah.
But now I don't see, you know, much hope unless they go at an early enough stage. And as you know, those developmental years are crucial.
Yeah.
You know, once you've learnt the craft, you only then perfect it. So what you've learnt up to 16, 17 years old is only very limited, and then after that, you're going over there and competing with people who are on a different level. So
I mean, I do get the problems they've got in Australia, and we're all part of it, and we've all got to take responsibility. But I think the big thing is recognising it's very subjective football. Hence why we designed our objective test. So we've got an online portal now. We can put up to 80 players through our test in 90 minutes, and at the end of the 90 minutes, it tells us technically, tactically, physically, who the strongest players are and who are the weaker players. The beauty of that, the weaknesses that get shown to us, we can help them develop into strengths. But the beauty of that is as well, anyone could run this test in Australia and identify the top talent within the age groups and go, right, you're in the top 2 in your squad. You actually need to play up an age group because it's been done objectively and no one can argue it. You don't need, with all due respect, to have a Pep Guardiola or a Jurgen Klopp to do this test. Anyone can do it who's got a little bit of football knowledge. And as long as the parameters are followed, and again, it's an offer that we're going to openly make to Football Federation Australia that we would happily give our IP and give our testing to all of the clubs of Australia, because then that way, objectively, the kids who need to go up an age group or two would be done objectively rather than subjectively.
Yeah.
For you,
no,
that's
that's
a football
great
background. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah, for me, and this is something that you and I have spoken about in the past. The moment I first heard about what your program's about and what it's based around, I looked to Wayne, who was there with me at that event where we met, and I just had a big smirk on my face. You know, for once, someone's brought this idea to the table that this country's needed. You know,
and we're doing it. I mean, we've probably, by the end of next year, we'll have gone through about 20,000 players in Australia, which is a good number. But like, we'd like this to be offered to all players and to all clubs. So whether you're a FQPL 4 club or you're an MPL club, every club can have this in the pyramid. And then we can start comparing scores nationally, and we know which players are improving and which players aren't improving. And unfortunately, you know, clubs are volunteer-based in Australia. Majority is volunteers who run it. This tool's invaluable. Also, pre-season, the way we pick players for squads, it's all done for you. During post-season, it shows you as a player if you've got better or if you've got worse, and it IDs that. So again, like, we're going to extend our offer to FFA, and we're hopefully going to hold meetings with them to extend it. And again, we're going to make this for free. We're not going to charge them. We don't want anything for it. We want to give it to them as a gift, because I'm an Australian, believe it or not, even with this accent. And I just want to see football grow here and get better. So roll on to the next part was you've then left that state set up at the AIS. What was the next stage for
So
you?
the AIS was the national team set up, and so on the back end of the state setup, we were already getting poached for the young Joeys, so the Australian team. So by the time we transitioned into Canberra for the national setup, we were already, there were two age groups, the older guys and the younger guys. The younger guys were eligible for the young Australian teams, the Joeys. The older guys were only eligible for early intake for the Australian Institute. So it made sure that it caught both age groups. And so obviously during my time towards the end of that state setup, we already were doing quite a few national team tours alongside playing with the Institute. So they were sort of like club and national. And then I had many tours with the Joeys, both overseas. We had European tours. And then obviously the next intake for the under-19s were coming along. And so towards the end, I sort of started to run into some disciplinary issues with myself, which was sort of holding me back. And this is touching base on what you and I have obviously spoken about, and where my heart lies now. It's sort of understanding the psychology behind the sport and the pressures associated with it. Obviously, a lot of kids don't know how to deal with their emotions and feelings with that whole mounting pressure. Being part of a national team setup's pretty daunting. So obviously, I had issues trying to balance the discipline at that point in time, but so did the coaches as well.
Yeah.
Because they themselves had no guidelines as to how to deal with people who are coming from the dysfunctional backgrounds, and, you know, how to sort of navigate around that.
Or why you were doing it as
well.
Or
why I'm doing it. Because as a kid, you don't know what you don't know, because you're sort of just going through life in that sort of subconscious programming. You know, you don't know why you're doing what you're doing. And if you've been raised in a dysfunctional household, not to say that you're a bad kid, but you just don't have the skills to understand, comprehend what's going on inside your head. So
we're gonna really get into the nuts and bolts of that. We're about to go to an advertisement, but we'll be back in a few minutes, guys. Thank you.
Would you one day like to be a professional football player? Would you like to be part of our pro player pathway? What is the pro player pathway? It's an opportunity for all Australian football players aged between 10 and 23 who want to join us to become the next professional football player. On the pro player pathway, you get to join me and my team free of charge to an event all around Australia. When you join me, we're going to teach you the secrets of football in Europe. And one day, maybe, you could be gracing the Champions League final. Guys, over the next 12 months, we're going to be coming around all the major cities in Australia. And when we come around all the major cities, we're going to be running our free events everywhere we go. So guys, what have you got to lose? Nothing. It's a free event. It's for boys and girls aged 10 to 23. And I'm going to teach you the secrets of becoming a top European football player. Oh, and one final thing. We're going to be giving away 20 scholarships to join me on this program of a lifetime.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Raymond Wood podcast. Now, Rob, we were speaking a little bit about that psychological aspect and you starting to play up a little bit and be naughty. And so what age was this and what were some of the issues that was coming about with your behaviour? And
Sure. So towards the end of the Australian Institute scholarship, I started running into disciplinary issues, and that was at about 17 years old. So I had some issues with, it started off with some petty stuff, like I took a jacket at the end of the Australian tour and I got caught with it. So it was like serious stuff back then, you know, and I was like, damn, like I really wanted that jacket to take back home.
was it a Croatian jacket?
It was an Australian national team jacket, and it was one of those big puffy ones, and I was thinking, you know, this would be cool back for where we were living at the time. It was freezing. So I got caught with that, and, you know, that was a big sort of, it blew out of proportion, or they had to at least, in combination with small things like, you know, not wanting to study at school, part of the AIS program. It didn't supplement the training. So I thought, okay, I just want to focus on the training rather than the school side. So, you know, naturally boys being boys was sort of like gravitate to sort of not skipping school, but doing the bare minimal to adhere to the program, which obviously you and I know is more common than not now. But at that time, it was pretty serious in my eyes. And the way it got perceived to me was like, you know, you're stepping out of line here. So, again, I was only operating on a lot of the programming that had already been sort of implemented into my head at the time. I wasn't interested in schooling, you know, I was misbehaving, so to speak, in these tours. And but yeah, it gave me, looking back at it now, it gave me all the knowledge and experience that I have now. I wouldn't necessarily change or reverse anything at that point in time because, again, everything happens for a reason. I'm a big believer. And at that point in time, I was just doing what I was doing, you know. So obviously AIS had disciplinary action to take, and they decided to cut my scholarship short towards the end. And so for me, that was like, okay, now I'm left out for dead. What do I do? I had a manager at the time who said, okay, let's take you to Europe, you know, where you belong. So he got me a trial at Juventus, and that was my transition into, okay, let's have a crack at going to the big stage. You're still the Australian goalkeeper, first choice for the Joeys, going to the 19s, AIS first choice. So again, taking that to Juventus was massive. So for me, that was my next stage with getting a trial there.
So what was it like? Talk to me about Juventus, because I've been to Juventus, and it's like there's a lot of history with Liverpool and Juventus, and it's an amazing club steeped in Italian history. I've got a real soft spot for Juventus.
Yeah, so for me that was surreal. Again, it was like the national team setup was a good preparation to going to that next stage, and for me that was like, okay, I'm here now. I've obviously got good enough to got given a trial. But I just remember the first day I was petrified, mate. I was in that change room, and luckily enough, we had another Australian goalkeeper there at the time, Jesse Van Straten. He was second or third choice to Buffon. So I remember he pulled me out of the dressing rooms, and he's just like, mate, you're here, you know, just give it to him, you know, like just do you, you know, don't worry about the language barrier, because that was obviously a big obstacle for me. Like, how on earth do I communicate with these guys at training? It was hard enough being multicultural in the Australian team. Now I've got, now I'm in Italy playing with Italian predominant
speakers. So you got English, you got Aussie, then you got Croatian, and you got San Somali and Italian.
So that was interesting. And I never forget, again, with the psychological battles of, okay, I'm here by myself. I feel very alone. There was no support network. My agent at the time was bouncing around. Like, he was there, but he was only new in the game back then. So he was starting out. I don't think he had the tools to be able to give me to properly navigate, settling into a giant club like Juventus. So for me, it was just like, okay, what's the worst that can happen? You know?
How long was you at Juventus for?
So initially it was a 2-week trial that they offered. That extended out to, I can't remember how long exactly, but I think I was there for a good part of a month or over a month. So the idea was obviously, at that time they told me that they had too many foreign players and Croatia was getting into the EU at the time. So it was like, we were happy to hold you here until that happens, and then we can get you in as a local European player. As it happened, Croatia didn't enter. So they've said, look, perhaps we'll keep you on your radar, on our radar, and let me go.
Yeah.
In which case I spent 3 days in Croatia just having a bit of a break until my next trial at Udinese. That was the next step.
Awesome.
So I had not even spent half a day in Croatia. Someone had found out that I was there, and I hadn't told anyone that I was visiting. It was a surprise visit just to give my body a bit of a break. And someone from Dinamo Zagreb came in and came knocking at my auntie's door and said, look, we were just interested in chatting to Rob if he's keen. We heard he's in town. And I was like, immediate reaction was dismissing, because Dinamo wasn't what they are today.
Yeah.
Back then, Luka Modric was still, wasn't even transitioning into England. He was still a key player for them. Eduardo was there as well.
Yeah.
And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to Udinese in a couple of days. It wouldn't hurt to just have one session with the keeper coach.
Yeah.
So, I phoned him up and said, let's do it. And I never forget, I told the keeper coach there at the time, whilst my first team was playing, he was there at the back coaching me, more so like a trial. And so I was just like, look, take it easy. I'm going to Italy in a day or two. So just be gentle, my body.
Yeah.
And mate, after like 10 minutes, he's really pushing to see what I got. And I was like, and me being me, I wouldn't say no to catching all the balls and, just showing him what I got. And it seemed to obviously impress him to the point where he's like, mate, can you come and show the club president tomorrow? The guys that weren't playing, they're doing sort of shooting drills and stuff. And that's when they sort of put me in with the main team to show them what I got. At which point they offered me, after that session, a contract and an offer.
So that was at Udinese?
That was at Dinamo Zagreb. So that was my sort of in between the few days that I had break. I thought, you know what, I'll go and have a bit of a kick around with them. And obviously they were all impressed with Mamic, the club president, and he's both the brothers that are very well known in Croatia, not for the right reasons, unfortunately. They offered obviously a contract and for me to sign, but the temptation for me to can the Italy Udinese trial was the first team Croatian spot.
Yeah.
So they offered me obviously the first team Croatian national goalkeeper was on his way out. So if you'd played for Dinamo, you would have got Champions League versus Real Madrid the following season. Yeah. Plus the Croatian first team. So at 17, I was like, mate, I can't turn that down.
So what was your deal at Dinamo? How long were you there for?
So the story with that, obviously, and as to why that didn't happen was the negotiation side of things didn't work because of the deal that the club president put forward. He wanted all rights to sign over to him, and as he does with all of his players, which isn't hasn't put him in the news tabloids for the right reasons, unfortunately. Initially, I said yes, so I flew home to Sydney, Australia, to do the deal, and he basically wanted no dealings with the agent manager, just to deal directly with the parents. So the fact that my agent sort of got back in touch with him, that deal fell through. So
where did that leave you then with your football? Where did you go next?
Well, the problem was then, obviously, Udinese was then canned because I had agreed to take that deal. Dinamo was then, because my agent wanted to do the deal, but not as he directed, the club football president. It sort of left me in no man's land. And at that point in time, I had then clubless, turned down these trials, the deal that fell through at Dinamo Zagreb. And then I was like, okay, I need to be playing somewhere. So Newcastle Jets were the only option at the time.
Wow.
So I signed basically as a backup and subsequently ended up in the youth setup there, which was unfortunate because, having had that higher level experience and opportunities to now being a backup at the Newcastle Jets was, in my eyes, a little bit of a setback. But I knew in my eyes that, the cream rises to the top. So I knew it was only going to be a matter of time before I'd got that first spot, which never ended up arising. And that can obviously be debated as to why.
Yeah.
But,
It's hard. I mean, obviously now, if we move on a little bit with our program, the Pro Player Pathway, you come out to our Sunny Coast event, I think, and you've seen our event, and you've seen the elements, and the reason why we put the program together was for one of them reasons, that when players do go across on a real trial, on a real opportunity, we give them that folder which has got all the stats, all the data in. So then that way, if that first opportunity doesn't come off, we can then open up option 2, option 3, option 4, option 5. And we discovered that when we looked into that complaints department of players and families within Australia, it's a no-brainer for us as well to do that. And by not being an agent, we're only going in with the right intentions, because we're only there to help players get an opportunity. We're not doing it because we're looking to take 15% at the end. So from your point of view, if you think you would have had access to the Pro Player Pathway when you were 15, 16, how do you think it would have helped you?
Without a doubt, having had attended Sunny Coast, seminar that you put on, without a doubt, I feel like that would have been the best preparation going into it. Now, again, that's coming from my background. So obviously I'd already had a good taste of the best institutions this country has to offer. And seeing that and what you've done with this program gives every player the equal playing field, which is phenomenal. Yeah. And obviously that insight to players and parents is crucial, because if you go there without the preparation, you're only going to be, faced with, subsequent psychological damage. And when you come and realise that, maybe you weren't good enough, and the agents, obviously, as you know, they're there for the vested interest. Financial aspect, he wants to put you in the biggest club, and you may not be necessarily prepared for it. So
we've spoken about it on previous podcasts, and it blows my mind that people create opportunities for players. They don't do any preparation, they don't do any framework, blueprint work, any foundational base. They don't gather data on the players. For me, they're setting everyone up to fail. They're setting the player up, the mum and dad up, they're setting themselves up to fail. They're going to look bad in the eyes of clubs in Europe. Or wherever it may be, the opportunities arise, and it wasn't a hard thing to notice for us. We just looked in the complaints department again, and we were like, why are people doing this? Why would you put your neck on the line and run the risk of it falling over? And it does fall over all the time. So moving on to that little bit, and we're going to get onto it in a moment, and what you're up to next in your life, and what program you're currently working on, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But we're just going to go to our final ad break, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Thanks, Rob.
Hey everyone, we are coming around every major city in Australia over the next 12 months. We have got free objective football testing going on, guys. It's for boys and girls aged 10 all the way through to 18 years of age. The objective testing is quite simple. We'll put you through our 6 tests and I'll give you your results: physical, technical and tactical. And also, we're going to choose 16 winners to join us on an all expenses paid trip to Europe in 2024 and also 2025. Guys, what have you got to lose? Nothing. It's free to sign up. You get free objective testing and you'll get a free feedback, and maybe you'll be joining me at the Santiago Bernabeu in 2024 or 25.
Hi everyone, this is the Raymond Wood podcast. We're here with Rob Kolak, and this is our final part of this episode. Now, Rob, we were just touching on your football career, and we spoke a little bit about our Pro Player Pathway and the benefits of that to players. Tell everyone what you're up to now.
So at the moment, I've got a few things in the limelight. As a business standpoint perspective, I'm involved in real estate and developments, but more on the fun side of things, and where I see myself long term is developing and creating a program for kids, especially tailor suited to something that your program offers, but dealing with your psychological aspect side of things, and also which entails preparation for both the athletes and the parents. Something that obviously I see that there's a big gap in the market for, and what people are yearning for. They need a bit of psychological support and guidance, and just a network where, players can connect with former players and have that access to that network. Because as we said before, it can be very isolating when you're sort of transitioning, and when you're overseas, it's extremely daunting. And so this is something I hold close to my heart, and the psychological aspect is what I feel that kids also need to be well prepared for when making that transition overseas.
So that probably comes out of my take on that's probably a little bit when you were that 16, 17-year-old and you've stolen that jacket for whatever reason you did, and you probably maybe could have done with that little bit of guidance and help with that rather than also them releasing you as well. Which I think maybe in hindsight with a lot of people in football who make the wrong decisions instead of actually putting an arm around and say, why did you actually take the jacket, and look into the reason. So that in itself is going to be invaluable. So what does that look like? Is it aimed at like players who are of a certain age, and is it for anyone and everyone? And is it educating the player, or is it educating the mums and dads as well?
Yeah, sure. So this is going to be for all ages. So, I mean, when you talk about psychology, I mean, it's a big thing now with mental health, and I'd sort of want to steer away from that and give that support and a bit of education on how to navigate and just provide that support network for these children. And it doesn't even have to be the children that are becoming professional athletes. It's for what happens should it not work out for them, and also have a big catch net on, what happens when we decide that football may not be the do-all and end-all. Okay, how do we now transition into the professional work life? Because that was a big one for me, when I realised at that transition point back into society that, okay, football, for whatever reason, might not work out for you. What kind of support do we have now? Because the clubs are very easy to turn their back on footballers the moment something goes wrong. And in my instance as well, it was like, okay, shut the door and see you later, off you go. I mean, we've been preparing you for years and we've invested all this time and effort and money, and we're just happy to shut that door on you. And it leaves you in a very dark, lonely, cold place. So it's something that, again, I hold a lot of space for and a lot of empathy for kids who have gone through that. And unfortunately in this sport, you and I know that there's a high percentage that will not, unfortunately, get to that desired outcome. And that's okay. How do we now transition back and create, we're still young and we've still got plenty of energy and life in us. But again, it's all about providing a bit of education and insight and support, and for the parents too. The parents themselves don't have, from what I hear now, a lot of the issue now with young players transitioning, parents become the agents, and with that comes a lot of the unsolicited advice, and how to sort of navigate around that.
It's knowing who to trust as well. That's the big one. And I think that's the problem. There's a lot of people in Australia, 99% are giving advice, but they don't have the runs on the board to give advice.
Exactly.
And then when there's people like us who come along, we get things thrown at us because they think we're in that group as well. And it's only one of the big things that we've discovered once people get to know us and know me. Like the greatest barrier that we break down is when we go on the tours to Europe. And we take families with us, and then like after the 2 weeks, they're friends forever. And they sign up for the programs and they're with us, and we're managing players through. And we've got thousands of players going through at the moment, which is amazing, and we're loving it, and we're scaling as quickly as we can. But we touched on, ironically, with Q Jallians in the last episode we've done, and he actually spent a few years at Newcastle as well, which is really weird that you've played there too. And it was all around like this fee for service, and parents are paying money to be at a club. But every year they're expected to retrial. It's like, why? Why is a 12-year-old retrialing every year at a club? They should be in for 5 years.
I completely agree with you. And that's the daunting part. And a lot of the reason why the talent gets lost in the pool, it's like, okay, every year you're battling up for the spot and you're investing the time and effort throughout the season. It should be a long-term project in my eyes anyway. And so what you're providing these kids is really good. It's something that we definitely needed.
So with your program, and hopefully we're going to get you involved a little bit with Pro Player Pathway, but also aside from being involved with us and doing it off to the side in your own business and life, when is your program kicking off, or is it already kicked off? And
so we're in the early stages now. Obviously, you and I have spoken about this quite a bit, but I anticipate within the 6 to 12 months we'll have something that's solid, that we can implement within Pro Player Pathway. But on the side as well, I think I should have something within the 6 months that can be practical and applicable to the public and for young athletes out there.
And that's, I think, the thing that you touched on, and I really love about it as well. You're saying it's not like the elitist program as well. It's not just for the so-called elite. It's for everyone who's involved in football, because the conversations we had at the Pig and Whistle that day, just having lunch after that event we went to, and then even since then, it just blows me away that it's so important for anyone. It doesn't matter where you are in your life. If you're a player, you're 10 years of age, or you're a mum and dad in your 40s, I think some of these lessons will help everyone, which just makes a better society and a better community.
For sure.
And that's like one of the things that we're trying to do, is we're trying to bring with that pro player pathway, is giving people access to some of this stuff and this technology, things like GPS units, intolerance testing, inflammation testing. We want everyone to have access to it, because as an example with our pro player pathway, getting that inflammation and intolerance test is invaluable in life, not just if you want to make it as a football player, but the fuel you're putting in your car is not going to let you perform properly if it's not the right fuel. And I think more and more people are realising that. So in regards to the programme, is it built up like of a series of like building blocks? It's not like one of these fast track programmes. Is it like we're going to turn you in 24 hours? Is it like a year? Is it 4 years? What does it look like?
So obviously my end goal is to have, and it'll be a little bit difficult to navigate with this specific niche with targeting the football players.
Yeah.
Keeping in mind the time zones that we're in, I wanted to create a program that's going to have 24/7 access to someone or anywhere in the world. So if it's a player that's in Europe playing and he needs, someone to talk to at that point in time, and as you know, obviously decisions that are made on the field and off the field could impact the rest of your career.
That's amazing.
Essentially.
So it's a remotely based program?
So remote-based program. It'll be in modules. We'll have obviously all the different modalities that provide that immediate support, like your breath work, your meditation, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But then also having that someone to pick up the phone and just let them know that they're supported. Someone just to sort of channel their emotions and feelings and say, it's okay.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that I was listening to Mateo Kovacic's interview the other day, and to hear how he's transitioned into Inter Milan, for example, and his manager's advice after the very first training, he come straight back into his hotel room, pale white, he's just full of stored emotion, and his manager's just like, okay, now you can cry. And that's the first thing he did, is just let all those emotions go. And it's just that someone to give you that sort of that advice and to say that it's okay.
Yeah.
And it's completely normal. We're all human. We all experience this similar, or, our experiences are different, but innately our emotions are much the same.
Yeah. Everyone analyses themselves too much, and they're on Google too much, getting all this information, and a lot of it's not good.
Yeah.
And as you say, it's just good to have that piece of professional advice to say that that's actually okay to cry, or it's actually okay to let that little bit of anger out, get on a punch bag or whatever it may be.
And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just, it gives you that ability to reset, and even in his words, he felt like a new player the next day. He's like, okay, I've gotten rid of all that stored emotion. Now I can reset and focus on my game.
I'm so happy as well to hear that it's a remotely based program, because that means it can get to anyone, no matter where they are in the world, as you've just said. And that's the whole reason we put the Pro Player Pathway together. And it's probably the world's only remotely based coaching tool. And it's funny because, as you've seen in the room, you get a lot of parents are skeptical at first, like, no, this doesn't work. This can't work. It does work.
Yeah.
Because the big thing that a lot of people are missing, it's the foundation, it's the base of knowing what to do from a football perspective. And I think it leads back into your stuff.
Yeah.
It's those pillars to success, breath work, meditation. Well, wait there. Why are we doing breath work and meditation? Well, it helps X, Y, or Z. Oh, okay, well, that makes sense. So it's going to help you in turn, not only on the football pitch, but off the football pitch as well.
Yep.
And that's what a lot of people forget. We spend 99% of our time off the football pitch, and they don't look at that. And that's one of the big things that we do in the Pro Player Pathway. We get them to work on stuff outside of football.
Yep.
Because if 99% of your life's going right, that 1%'s easy.
Yep.
So that's exciting. So you think by probably midway of next year, this will be fully up and running? And
yeah, for sure. That's what we're aiming for. And obviously, I just wanted to mention that this would obviously be a collaborative effort with top sports psychologists, former soccer players. Actually, we've got a whole range of athletes that have obviously put their hand up to help in this sort of space.
Fantastic.
So again, we're going to have the opportunity to pick up the phone, call someone who's been in that position before, who can give you that advice and support from a different perspective.
Yeah.
So
it's
that's
invaluable. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's invaluable.
Yep.
We're going back to him again, but we were talking to Q the other day, and it's exactly that. Like, we're offering players of like Q Jallian's expertise, yourself. You know, we've got some of these top level coaches who are coaching a Category 1 and 2 clubs in the UK, who we're basically bringing them to the doorstep of kids in Australia, so they know the information they're getting and the support is invaluable.
Yeah.
And with all due respect, there's a lot of good coaches in Australia, but also there's a lot of volunteers out there who are giving it a go, but don't really have the runs on the board, and they're not really in the best sort of headspace to give the advice.
Yeah.
And it's scary to think that we've got kids out there getting this wrong advice, and it's setting them up for failure.
Yeah.
Whereas you said, if they can speak to the professionals,
Yeah.
and the beauty of this is it's scary where it can go. And
Yeah.
hopefully we're going to be part of the next wave of getting that wheel back to where it was, and getting more of those Aussie players, Matildas and Socceroos into the top level in the Premier League. It's been really good chatting to you, mate. And as I said today, for our listeners, we're going to get Rob back on again because we really want to delve in to your programme in more detail. And obviously, I'm very excited to hear that as well, that you've got such a good team behind you, and you're going to have all these ex-pros and athletes who are going to be part of the programme, and it's something I'm so excited to bring to our pro player pathway as well. So a big thank you, mate, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And we'll see you back hopefully early part of next year.
For sure. Thank you.
Again, a big thank you to all our listeners. That was the Raymond's Wood podcast, and we are very excited to bring our next guest here in the next 7 to 10 days. Peace and namaste.
Namaste. Thank you.